brand situation, story, I should say. Yep. So here we are on the Speaking Up Network's Sun Sessions, which is a weekly kind of like check in for various people, often around different parts of the world. I'm Vernon Adrian Emong, coming in from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We have the founder of the Speaking Up Network, Animah Kosai, and we have four guests with us. We have Karen Wybro, Lisa Barnwell, Melissa Indot, and Jan Krishenk. And together, we're going to try and unpack a particular situation that has occurred over the last, I would say, 5 days, 6 days, involving a global celebrity called Russell Brand. And we're going to look at how the story has played out and what it has actually done in unpacking gender relations around the world, basically. Yeah. So here we are on the Speaking Up Network, which is a platform, which is an alliance of various humanitarian-centered individuals and organizations who come together to talk about issues that would actually affect fairness, justice, fair play, equal opportunity, etc., for different kinds of people all over the world. Before I go any further, I'm going to ask Animah Kosai, the founder of the Speaking Up Network, to maybe say a couple of words about the Speaking Up Network, as well as ease us into the topic of the week. Animah, over to you. Vernon done speaking.
Thank you, Vernon. I'm so glad to see the room quickly populating up. And this is a completely logistics thing, so forgive me. I see that we have a speaker sitting in the audience. So Daniel, please raise your hand and we can bring you up. This is what LinkedIn does sometimes. And also, I'm so delighted that we see Tony as well. So Tony Summers-Hargis is in the audience, and she wrote a book about sexism. Am I saying it right? And Tony, if you can speak, please come and join us as well, because I think your insights are going to be really valuable. If you can't because you're in the middle of something, or you're in a loud place, that's okay. Completely understand. So yeah, I'm just bringing Daniel up. Thanks. And I feel, so first of all, I want to recognize Melissa, because over the weekend, Melissa's going, are you going to talk about Russell Brand? And so I think she kind of planted the seed. I think we would have anyway, right? But once we got together on Monday, we would have gone, oh, shall we talk about this? But I think the reason why we're doing this, and I'll talk about the Speaking Up Network first. And I want to do a really big shout out to Jan as well, Jan Cruikshank, because I think she's been like one of my biggest supporters from day one, and so we're gonna hear from her from a survivor's perspective, right, in terms of the topic we're talking about today. And I just want to say that I first started what was called Speak Up at Work and the Speak Up Collective not long after Me Too, and I was talking a lot about sexual harassment. And I think by way of introduction, I realize it's been 13 years now since I have been addressing sexual harassment in a very big way. And when I say addressing, I mean basically putting in place policies, conducting training, overseeing investigations, sometimes conducting investigations in the company I used to work with. So we were really big on addressing things like, well, harassment generally, which of course included sexual harassment. And I used to talk a lot on Malaysian radio as well about this. And now there's a law. There's now a law, I'm so happy to say, in Malaysia that addresses sexual harassment. There is not a specific law in the UK, and I think that's something that maybe people want to sort of take up. There is the Equality Act, where, because if sexual harassment could be a gendered issue, but it isn't always, right? I mean, men also get sexually harassed. So I think the Equality Act is not really the best law to put in place, but that's for workplace. And I think the other thing I want to mention is sexual harassment happens everywhere, not just in work. It happens on transport. I myself, I'm a survivor of sexual assault on a bus many, many years ago when I was 19. And that kind of, I think, really informed in a deep subconscious way, because I buried it. I buried it for many years. And it was only when I started doing it in my workplace with Betty Yo, who is with Awam in Malaysia, that it suddenly came, it's like this buried trauma all came rushing up. So when people say, why don't women report, or why don't they say anything sooner, it's amazing how our brains are able to kind of like, it's so painful, we just hide it and bury it, and it comes out in the strangest ways. So I have written, I've spoken, I train a lot on things like sexual harassment and other forms of harm in the workplace. So I realize I'm kind of not quite answering the Speaking Up Network. Then I think, as Jan has seen, Lisa and the others, it just evolved. We started talking about other issues, the whole DEI spectrum, whistleblowing, safety, harm, psychological safety, and we've gone beyond the workplace, and we talk about a whole lot of issues, including ESG, climate change, any issues which we feel people are really, really concerned about and want to make change on. So I'm really fortunate that my co-founder and CTO, Philip Thorne, said, I'll build a platform for you, and this is what we have. It's wonderful. It's wonderful having being surrounded by some incredible people here. And I think the first thing, just again going back to logistics, we hold this every Thursday, and we have our sort of loyal following, people who come back, and speakers who come back. I think everyone here, with the exception of Daniel, hi Daniel, you're new to us, has spoken at our sessions before, whether it's here on LinkedIn or on Clubhouse. And so what we've done is, if you go to the comment or the details of this event, you'll see there's two documents we've got there. One is the Jamboard, where you can put any comments which might be inspired by what you're listening to, or your thoughts on harassers in plain sight. Or you can also look at there's a Google document that we have there, where we include resources. So I think Vernon will speak to more of that later, but we include resources if you want to learn more or you need support. And Vernon, shall I read out Lisa very kindly drafted something for us, because we realized that this is not an easy conversation that we're going to have. The people on stage are, in a sense, experts, professionals. We know how to hold space. We know how to hear difficult things. But we recognize that not everybody feels that way. So one of the things I just want to read out something that, Lisa very kindly drafted around what we want to talk about, safe space. So I want to frame that the conversation that we have here, while, yes, it is prompted by the whole expose around Russell Brand, we don't really want to be hung up on talking about Russell Brand. What we're talking about are the issues that comes up, because they're very common in many cases. It's just that this one is very, very high profile. So this conversation is to move us forward in understanding the role we all play in allowing perpetrators to hide in plain sight, and the shame or blame that we may feel as a result. We recognize that some of the conversation may be triggering for some or many, and we ask that you practice self-care and remove yourself from the conversation if it feels better to do so. So we're not watching, who's leaving and feel like that. Just if you feel I can't hear this, it's fine. But one of the things we want to highlight is that if you do need to reach out, if you need support, we do have a list of organizations in that Google sheet. There's a link that's been populated by some of the people here on stage. They've put links in terms of their own countries, and we recognize that you may be from many countries that are not there. And if you do know organizations that support people who may have been harmed through sexual violence and so on, you can put the names of your country, names of the organizations, and how people can reach them there. A website will do. All right. So one of the other things we want to highlight is, because we are very conscious that we have survivors both on the stage as well as probably listening in the audience. So please, we do not tolerate any abuse or toxic behavior. Let's bear in mind that this is a platform to educate, to listen, and to learn, and the overriding standpoint is do no harm. So I would also like to, this is something that I guess in me leading this, I want to model that if I say or do anything that may be harmful or triggering, feel free to tell me. And if you're on stage, just say, Animah, this is, I'm open to listening to that. Or if you're not on stage and you want to just message, either DM me or put something in the comments there, we're looking at that. So this is the way that we all learn and grow, because what I want to emulate is the fact that we shouldn't be defensive if somebody tells us that we said or done something harmful. None of us want to harm other people. So if somebody points it out, what we should do is aware that we may feel some guilt and shame and feel defensive, but really the first step is to say, I'm so sorry, and don't defend yourself or argue. That's not what we want to do here. So on that note, I'm now going to invite Jan. So honored that you're here today with us, Jan. So Jan's in Scotland. I've known her for quite a number of years, when she was going through her own case of sexual assault at work. And so I know Jan's not going to talk about the incident itself. What Jan is really going to talk about is her experience once she went she reported it to the employer and the police, because what we want to show is for people to understand that it's not that easy and what happens when survivors do try reporting, right? And Jan is quite big on Twitter, or the site formerly known as X, and she's also got a blog. The other thing I want to applaud her for is that she has, on the Speaking Up Network, started a group. It's completely new, so nothing's quite happening yet, but to support people who want to understand, or they've been sexually harassed and they want to support each other. This is a private group, and there's a link in the resources that we've shared. Jan's story has also been covered in the Times Scotland. So I think if you Google her name, you will find her videos and things like that where she talks about her own case. So over to you, Jan. I'm so glad you can be with us here today.
Thank you, Animah. It's a nice introduction. Like you say, I'm not going to go into details about what my case, how it arose, other than to say that it began as sexual harassment in the workplace and ended up with a very serious sexual assault. At the time, I didn't tell anyone because I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I hadn't managed to stop it. I was ashamed that I didn't react the way that people expected to react. I didn't think about reporting it because I just thought if I pretended it hadn't happened, it would just go away. I've been absolutely triggered beyond measure this week reading social media. I go on social media quite a lot to call out injustices. I can't believe the amount of people who have said that Russell Brand is being tried by social media and that he's innocent until proven guilty. The flip side of that is every victim therefore is a liar until they can prove otherwise, which really, really triggers me. When I reported, eventually, after I'd suffered a breakdown, I reported to my employer that I couldn't work with this man and why. I was disbelieved. I was called a liar. The man in question had sent me a photograph of his erection, which I produced as evidence and said, this is the kind of things that he's been sending me. He said that it was a consensual relationship, I'd had an affair with him, and my employer believed him. There was absolutely no evidence I'd had an affair. There were no pictures from me to him or any messages like that. However, the onus was on me to prove that his behaviour was unwanted. It was extremely difficult. I had sent him messages back saying, please leave me alone, I'm not interested. These were all disregarded. The problem I find is that people are very, very quick to say, he's a nice guy, he didn't do it to me, so therefore I don't believe it. It's like saying the Yorkshire Ripper didn't murder every woman he ever met. It doesn't mean to say because he didn't murder you that he didn't murder anyone else. It's very traumatic to relive it. A lot of people don't tell because they don't want to revisit the event again. There is the shame that's associated with a sexual assault where people feel, what could I have done to stop it? People automatically blame themselves, and then on the downside of that, society therefore blames them as well. It's also really difficult to tell if there's been a power imbalance. If someone there is much stronger than you think that they'll be believed over you because they are more respected or whatever. And then the question has also come up with the Russell Brand thing. Why did they not tell? Why are they suddenly telling now? When I told my work, and I also reported it to the police. Obviously, because it was a colleague who had done this to me, the police contacted my workplace. My workplace said I'd had an affair with him, and therefore the police discredited me because they thought I was just making it up. The story was I was a jilted lover and I was just doing this to ruin his reputation. I was absolutely distraught. How do you get over something like this when you're being called a liar for reporting it? So I can understand a lot of victims don't report because being called a liar is just equally as damaging as the sexual assault itself. You then come down to he said, she said. People who commit sexual offences tend to not do it with an audience. So therefore it always comes down to, unless you're physically damaged, it's my word against his. Most people don't have the strength to speak out. There's safety in numbers. And in the case of Russell Brand, when other victims came forward and spoke, it then gave power to the other ones who could say, I'm not alone, it's not my word against his. There's lots of people who have experienced this behaviour from this man, so therefore I can understand them coming forward when they've got someone to corroborate their version of events. It doesn't mean to say that it's a pack ganging up against him. He's innocent until proven guilty, whereas the victim is a liar until they can prove otherwise. And that's extremely, extremely difficult to do. It is very, very damaging when you go onto social media and you see he will never get a fair trial because he's been tried by social media. But then a victim will never get a fair trial because they'll always be judged on, well, why was she in that position in the first place? Why did she let him into her hotel room? Why was she out at midnight? Why did she do this? Society teaches us to question why the victim put themselves in that situation. They never stop and think about why the perpetrator behaved the way he did. And that's why I speak out. I gave my story to the national press because when I was at work, I was told that if I spoke about it, I would be dismissed. The company dismissed me anyway. So staying silent didn't pay me. I didn't do it for money. I didn't speak out for financial gain. The company did eventually settle with me out of court for unfairly dismissing me, but I still lost over £150,000 of lost earnings. I still lost my reputation, and I still lost my mental health. I wasn't believed, and that was so damaging. And I chose to give a story to the national press because it wasn't revenge. I wanted people to know that I wasn't the person they portrayed me to be. I tried to clear my own reputation, and I support other survivors because I feel that it's important that somebody needs to listen somewhere. I think that's me finished, Animah.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It's courageous of you, and I think it's so important to have the courage to do that, because in doing so, you are actually allowing for other people to come around to accepting damage that has been done to them, which they may have been in denial for the longest time, and for the rest of us to understand how difficult it is in situations where one's own ability to make sense of a very traumatic incident, can be reframed through conversations, through hearing other people's stories, as well as how the good-hearted among us might actually respond to it. And so I do hope that all this while you have found enough support, and I'm sure you have, because you've turned your your trauma and your pain into an amazing initiative, and we're all here with you, definitely, to listen more and to together work at unpacking these situations that often enough are either ignored or dismissed or diminished or not taken seriously enough, because I guess it's the thing I call it societal patriarchy, right? That in a way does something to diminish voices that either are not male, are not privileged, etc. And often the victims are quite disadvantaged. And one of the things that has come out in the conversation with the Russell Brand situation is how he's got a colony of lawyers who will be there to jump in and help him work out the loopholes and the various ways in which he will be able to kind of like worm his way out of the predicaments that are building up, against him. So yeah, thank you very much, Jan. Animah, would you like to say anything in response to what Jan has shared?
I've heard Jan's story many times, and each time she speaks, I cannot help but be moved. And I think this is the thing. I think for people who may not have thought about this before, and especially I'll address men here, and of course there are men who have also been victims of sexual violence. I think it's really helpful to listen to people share their story, especially women. I just heard a podcast yesterday, and this was Alan Ball of White Ribbon Australia, who was talking to Mark Green and Charles Mathias in their Remaking Manhood podcast. And he said that 2/3 of women around the world, I think that's the figure, have, or is it 1/3? Oh God, that's a big difference, isn't it? Have experienced.
Oh, it's 2/3. It's 2/3.
2/3.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's massive. Have experienced some form of sexual violence, including sexual harassment, in their lifetime, right? That's beyond a pandemic, right? It is massive, and it's only since Me Too, when some of these stories have started coming out, because women have been silent for so long. So as Jan said, the moment one victim shares their story, and others say, well, this happened, so me too. And I think for me, I noticed a lot of men were very caught by surprise, whereas for women, this was our world. We knew. Even among us women who may not have had direct experience, we knew women who had, because we'd share among each other. And this is where I'd like to invite men who may be less aware of some of these things to start listening and start believing. And when I say listen with an open heart, with care, with empathy, and not try to rationalize and go, oh, well, maybe because you did this or he did that, because that's not helpful. And that's why women shut down and we don't share things with you, because you want to take everything and rationalize it. Whereas for us, it's like, this is our experience. This has happened to us. We navigate a very different world from what men navigate. I want you to think about that. And we've normalized it to such an extent that us women, we don't think twice about the fact that, we carry our car keys in our hands in case we get attacked. We're trained to do that. It's normalized. And I think now we need to start having these conversations to go, this isn't how we should be living our lives. And for this to happen, we need men to come to the table and listen and go, oh my God, we need to do something about this. So we always say that sexual violence, violence against, I know they call it violence against women and girls. I'd rather that it's called violence by men, because we need to be putting, shining the spotlight on where it's happening. And men need to be addressing this, right? So I thank you, Jan. Hearing you, I hope that, some of those who listened to were moved, and I can tell from some of the messages that are coming in that they definitely have. And Jan has spoken, you've spoken to the Scottish Parliament, haven't you? As well, you got invited there to share your story, and she's spoken at universities, young people who because we really want people to hear real stories and learn and really think about how they can show up differently. So thank you so much, Jan. Back to you, Vernon.
Thanks, Animah, and thank you, Jen, once again. Okay, I'd like to pass the mic over to Lisa. If you would like to introduce yourself and speak to the topic and share with us. I believe you're going to be speaking from the point of view of what men kind of like need to come around to, correct? Because that's where you operate. You're a crop trainer in the area of men in management. Lisa, over to you. Vernon done speaking.
Can I just interject? I think it's Karen. Lisa is not able to speak at the moment.
Oh, okay, okay.
I think Karen after Jan. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Karen, are you ready to go? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
And I believe you'll be speaking in the area of victim blaming and your experiences and what you've learned. Karen, introduce yourself. Over to you. Vernon done speaking.
Thank you, Vernon, and thank you, Jan, for sharing your story. I hadn't heard your story before, and it was certainly moving. And I think something that I catch myself doing sometimes is even finding myself being shocked by these things, even though I know very much that they happen all the time. And I think that's something that I have to stop myself from saying as well sometimes as, wow, I can't believe that happened, or some other sort of form of questioning about realities, when actually I think what Animah was saying there is very, very true, that we normalise our experiences so much in society, and we sometimes diminish them ourselves because we don't want to admit them or think about them or share them because it's painful and we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And all of my work, so I should basically just say quickly what I do. So I train businesses and organisations and police services and councils on how to create safe spaces for women and how to effectively communicate that with your audience. And I think one of the things that's really come out of the last week as well is the fact that victim blaming is a societal issue. It's not necessarily, well, it's not a male issue actually. It's quite well researched that women engage in victim blaming equally, sometimes more so than men, which is quite a difficult thing to accept in this conversation and quite a difficult thing to then challenge. And I was thinking earlier today about this conversation and thinking about this concept of societal gaslighting, and it obviously sounds there like Jan experienced institutional gaslighting as well. So we are very, very much entrenched socially and culturally in victim blaming. So I talk about victim blaming a lot in my training and my workshops, or any kind of training that I do. I delivered a presentation this week to a conference on government and policy, and really again it all comes back to this deeply entrenched societal and cultural persistence of victim blaming. And we see it from institutions, we see it from each other, from peers, from the general public. And really for me, the discourse from the Russell Brand allegations really has cemented that as being so critical to move the needle. And I call it kind of moving the needle from why did she to why did he, and really centering perpetrators. And Animah, I absolutely agree with you, and even posited this to the conference delegates this week and to people there from government, that when we call it violence against women and girls, we're erasing a perpetrator from the act itself. And is that useful? Is that harmful? Do we need to think about a new title that we use when we talk about these things? Because if we do want to engage men and boys, but also we want to engage other women in the conversation, then we really need to think about how we phrase things. And so looking at, I share lots of examples of communications that have come from police services, that have come from the NHS even, that have come from government, that really centre women, but they only centre women as somehow wanting to pinpoint their involvement in what's happened to them and somehow hold them responsible. And that is really crucial, I think, to shifting the focus from the victim to the perpetrator, but also while establishing the real impact this trauma has on women. The continuum of violence we know happens, from a really young age. We know that girls get first experience catcalling or any kind of sort of public harassment usually in their school uniform from the age of about 11 or 12. But we also bring girls up to believe that what they do, what they wear, how they act, what they drink, how they behave somehow is implicit in what happens to them. We don't actually talk to children necessarily about, this is the threat that we're scared for you of, but we don't name it. So it's a very confusing message that we send to children, but we embed that victim blaming very early on. We also, I believe, perpetrate this idea that girls are somehow responsible for boys' behaviour through school, through gender norms, through saying boys will be boys. So this really is so fundamentally a social and cultural issue, victim blaming, and we've seen it this week, essentially re-traumatising victims and survivors, but also traumatising people who might not necessarily be direct victims or survivors, but are being gaslit by the public around them to believe that women are liars, and really strengthen this myth that women are liars, that women are overly emotional, but also that they have real intent to destroy men's lives, which is a really shocking picture, really, when we think about it, of how women have been portrayed in society for thousands of years. So that's my perspective, and I'll leave it there. That's me speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you. Victim blaming. It's it's kind of like perpetuated through history, really. This whole idea of the hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Those kinds of things. I mean, like the cliches that we see, the tropes that we see in cultural expressions again and again, and leaders of communities, fathers and the mothers, but fathers as well, need to kind of take a good look at what's going on there and what exactly we might be perpetuating to our sons, and figure out different ways of coming around to expressing shock maybe, or surprise, or a response that could be a lot more constructive than destructive. This is something that men really need to step into. Yep. Animah, would you like to comment on anything that Karen had just said?
Thanks, Karen. I like this phrase I hadn't thought about before. Societal gaslighting. I'm definitely going to use it in future. And like you, because you and I are both active on Twitter, right? I'm pretty shocked with not so much that Russell Brand, or anybody for that matter, any celebrity has done these things. I'm pretty shocked at the amount of rhetoric that has surrounded this, talking about conspiracy theories and all that. I mean, at the heart of it, there have been women who have been raped, sexually assaulted by this man, and that's not surprising, because coming back to this issue of harassers in plain sight, he showed himself on TV, in the media, to be someone who was deeply misogynistic, and yet we put up with that. I mean, it's like, and I do feel, and maybe we'll get to this at some stage, I want to know the role of the media, the enablers, and I think maybe once we've gone round, we can talk about that as well. The enablers being the media, employers, and society that actually not only protect harassers like Russell Brand, but encourage this behavior and allow it to perpetuate. And so there's a group of us here right now, right on this stage, and many others who are saying, no, this narrative, this rhetoric has to change because it's harming all of us. It's not just harming women. It's not just harming girls and boys and non-binary folk. It is harming men too. And I think that needs to be understood, that men are harming themselves most of all. And I think this is where the whole denial comes up. So I'm happy to explore that. I was just thinking of the conditioning, and I'm just wondering, Vernon, maybe this is where Melissa would be a great person to come in and speak next, because I think it flows nicely from what Karen has just said, and she can respond to that as well. Back to you, Vernon.
Thanks, Animah. Yep, I believe, yes, it is time for Melissa, whom we haven't seen in a while. Wonderful to have you back on, in the sessions with us, Melissa. Great to hear, that you have something to contribute, and it's always going to be something quite special. Melissa, perhaps you can introduce yourself and then speak to the topic. Wonderful. Vernon, done speaking. Over to you, Melissa.
Hi, this is Melissa speaking. Can you hear me okay?
All good.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, thank you, Animah and Vernon, for having me here. And I just want to invite everybody who's been listening just to take a breath, because this topic is powerful. And after Jan sharing her journey with us, this is who we really are. We're humans here having this lived experience, and so often it's easy for us to jump and take sides. And what we want to do is really feel into the truth of an experience. And Jan, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. These situations happen for a reason. It's here to wake us up. And having conversations like this, and most importantly, being able to really allow ourselves to be fully present in the moment and to just simply witness another person's experience and be full-hearted about it. The empathy that you mentioned, Animah, is so very important, because it's so easy when we're listening to somebody else to kind of get into our own story, as you mentioned earlier. But maybe because of this, maybe because of that, and to bring context to it based on our own personal story. But what we're really here to do is to hear each other's experiences, and how can we find a way to connect. I myself have been a victim of sexual assault at a very young age, at the age of 13, and I've had many conversations with my mother very recently about this, actually, and I just want to touch on that conditioning piece. We're all here, we've all grown up in different cultures, in different generations, different decades. Our parents have lived different things, but ultimately in terms of gender, we have been deeply conditioned to see the other gender, and in this case I'm just going to speak from a binary term, Animah, only because that's all I know right now. Okay, boys behave this way, girls behave this way, and we hear it, we see it, it's in the media, and we're basically being brainwashed to fit into either one, depending on how we identify. And so we become very, what's the word I want to use? Very tunnel visioned. And what's so important with learning how to listen is to go beyond our tunnel vision. It's to develop that skill of deep listening, because otherwise all these unconscious bias that we have been conditioned with, they narrow our field of view, and they narrow the experience that we have in life, and more than anything, they narrow the feeling that we can have that brings us closer together. I am personally very moved just by just being present in this space. We're having this conversation, and I think the most important thing I can invite everybody here to do is, when you hear somebody else speak and share what their point of view is, no matter what it may be, the minute you feel some level of discomfort, the minute you feel some level of resistance, the slightest bit of irritation, maybe a little bit of heat even in your body, that you're angry, right? I want you just to notice that about yourself. Notice what your reaction might be. What are your thoughts? Are you dying to say something in response? Is a story coming up for you about something that happened? Are you wanting to jump to the defense? Are you wanting to attack? Just notice yourself first, because that self-awareness is where the change comes. I'm just going to pause there right now, Animah, because there's so much going on in my body right now. From the minute you opened this room and when Jan shared her experience with this, my heart cracked wide open. And then, of course, just seeing everybody here in this room, I am feeling super vulnerable. I have my own story, but the most important thing is I'm feeling so proud that we're all here holding space for this. Let's be careful about taking sides, because at the end of the day, and without minimizing the victim's experience here, two people in any sexual assault, in this case 2 people, have had their lives affected by this. And when we take sides, what we do is we take the power away from the victim. We also take the power of potential healing away from the perpetrator. So how can we contribute to making the journey of, I want to say the journey of healing and justice smoother by not bringing our own stories into the conversation, when we learn to hold space for what has actually happened? That would be my prompt for now. This is Melissa, and I'm complete for now.
Vernon here. Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think that's so important, right? About not centering ourselves in the story of somebody else who is being vulnerable and sharing it with us. I think that is such an important reminder. And I guess this is where the situation goes awry, when the listeners decide that they need to take control of the story. And it's such a wrong thing to do. I don't know what to say. Yeah. Animah, any thoughts on what Mel has shared?
Thanks, Melissa. It's always so enlightening listening to you, right? Because you bring this really right down to the gut, to the core. And I think a lot of us don't go there. Most people don't. And this pausing is something that I've advocated for a while, whether we're talking about something like this, although this is really hard-hitting and deep, or something as simple as somebody making a remark at work, or leaders not listening. I mean, I talk a lot to leaders and say, just stop talking and listening. Or you can say STUF for short. But the thing is to have that pause and realize what's going on inside you. And it's the hardest thing to do. I think I need to say that, because when you spoke, Melissa, I was like, okay, where am I feeling in my body? And what commonly comes up for me when I'm in conversations like this is, you mentioned heat, anger. And I'm aware that that tends to come up for me simply because, I think of people like Jan. I mean, I've Jan and I have talked a long time, and all these other people who write to me, who speak to me with what they've experienced. And there's this sense of advocate, maybe that's the lawyer in me, that feels this is unfair. So for me, what comes up is that sense of injustice and the sense of wanting to repair it, right? And that's where anger goes. And I actually love that feeling of anger. I know for people, especially for women, some women, this is scary, but for me, this is what's going on inside of me. And anger normally is because we feel something is unfair and we want to set it right. And that's where anger moves into action. And I will say that for me, setting up the Speaking Up Network was a feeling of that. Setting up, this morning I was talking about Shara, the anti-haze group in Malaysia that I helped kickstart. That came from a space of anger as well. Like, how dare people not see this? And so, but I'm coming back to what you mentioned, the pause, because I am an activist by nature, right? I'm action, but let's do something. But that comes from somewhere. And I think it's really nice to have that pause. Like, what am I feeling? Am I feeling defensive? Where's that coming from? Am I feeling ashamed? Maybe I did something that I'm not very proud of. Oh, I didn't know this was wrong. Or how dare you say that I've sexually harassed you? I didn't have the intention. That whole thing. And in the training that we do, just to share, when we talk about, let's say, sexual harassment, it's actually not about intention. It's about impact, right? So it doesn't it doesn't matter as much what your intention is. If what you have done has harmed somebody, then that's the impact, and that's what you must stop doing, and that's what you must apologize for, even though you didn't have the intention to hurt, right? So these are the kind of things we're trying to get people to understand. And that's where often the misunderstandings happen. People think, well, I didn't harm you because it wasn't my intention to harm. Actually, most people don't have an intention to harm, but we do it inadvertently. And I think one of the things about, let's say, Russell Brand's case that I just want to speak to very quickly is this issue of consent. And here we've got two parties. So one person who feels I can go this far, and another person feeling, no, I'm not comfortable, I don't want to go there. And so there's been a lot of conversations around consent. But what we've often seen in cases, and this tends to be gendered, men and women, is that the man commonly say, well, she didn't tell me, I didn't know, therefore, in his mind, he did not sexually assault because he thought she had consented, right? And she's saying, well, I didn't consent. And the conversations we're having is that consent means you actively have to say yes and continue showing that, yes, I'm okay with this, as opposed to the silence. But even women who said no and so on, in the case of Russell Brand, we saw a lot of that. He continued. So for us, we could see there's a bit of intention there. But the misunderstanding about sexual harassment and other forms of violence sort of centers around consent. And this is where we want men especially to kind of understand what consent really means, and to honor and respect that person in front of them. They have their own agency. You don't force yourself on somebody. You don't speak for them. They are their own person, right? So I'll just stop there. I realize I'm going further than what Melissa said. I want to say thank you, because reminding us of how this feels for us in our bodies, beyond our heads, because the moment we activate that self-awareness, we become more intentional, and we become, I think, more compassionate as well, because we realize, hang on, I'm just reacting from a defensive thing and it's harming others. Let me stop. And one of the things, just to share with you what I do, is when I realize that I'm not in the mood to be self-reflective, I remove myself from the situation, because I know I can get, if I'm angry, I can say things. So I'll remove myself from the situation. I'll go away. I'll have coffee. That tends to be my pick-me-up. But I think once we have that, we know what we're like. That's really, really important. Not just in terms of these kind of issues, but even in terms of leadership, because for me, that's where it was. I regularly hung out at coffee cafes at work, because I was like, if I don't go, I'm going to shout at somebody, so I'm going to go and have coffee, right? But I think this is where we need to practice these things. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Melissa. Back to you, Vernon.
Okay, thanks, Animah. Vernon here. Yep. This has been an amazing session. We're into 48 minutes of the session, the Sun session. I'd just like to talk a little bit about what the Sun session is. The Sun session, SUN, stands for Speaking Up Network. Speaking Up Network is the platform that Animah had spoken about. It is where we are using technology to galvanize humanitarian-centered individuals as well as organizations to come together and figure out how we can work together to make a more just world, to be able to, bring our better selves to the community, and to be able to answer to various hurts and damages and things that are creating harms in society, etc. Speaking Up Network comes from the fact that we'd like for people to speak up to power, to speak the truth to power. And one of the precepts of the Speaking Up Network is to listen first. So it's not just about, speaking up without thinking, but it's about listening first before speaking up, and speaking up because you need and you feel you must speak up. So usually what happens is we have rooms once a week. It's called the Sun Sessions. And in the Sun Sessions, we usually look at various issues that are going around in the world. And this time, this week, it's on Russell Brand. A couple of weeks ago, it was about the Spanish kiss controversy at the Women's World Cup prize giving. That ran for 2 weeks because we felt it was really important. Interestingly enough, the last few sessions have been related to gender relations, and it has been coincidental. We have moved outside of various other issues, such as we've had workplace bullying, we've talked about discrimination, we've talked about various other kinds of multiculturalism and how to deal with it. We had a session, and that's an ongoing session which recurs every once in a while, called Multiculturalism, the Hard Slog Ahead, mainly because multiculturalism by itself requires for all of us to be on our toes, to understand, to make an effort to kind of like be prepared to understand each other more than looking out for faults and stuff like that. The Speaking Up Network was founded by Animah Kosai. It started up with speaking up at work, but over the course of the last 2 years, the workplace aperture has enlarged to become everywhere where human activity exists. And so it has become, from speaking up at work, it has become the Speaking Up Network. Okay, so what you can do is go to a Google Doc that we have created for the Sun Sessions, and the Google Doc is where you'll find information about previous Sun Sessions as well as what is going on here this evening. To go to that Google Doc, you go to a shortened URL, which is bit.ly, bit.ly, Sun
So
Sessions.
Vernon, it's available.
Yep.
It's available on the comment section here.
Right, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, it's all there, so you can go to the Sun Sessions bit.ly Google Doc, and you'll see stuff there. Everybody is invited to contribute to the Google Doc in comments, as well as on a Jamboard where people are putting up their little comments. Yeah. So on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the mic to Daniel, who's never spoken before or has never been in any of our Sun Sessions before. So I want to quickly pass the mic to Daniel, who's going to talk about male allyship. All right, Daniel, are you ready to roll?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. If you can introduce yourself and then speak to the topic. Wonderful to have you join us. I'm Vernon, done speaking. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Vernon. Thank you, Animah. It's a real pleasure to be here for the first time at the Speak Up Network. I've really enjoyed the conversation, as hard as it's been sometimes to hear what people have been sharing. I also appreciate, to give my voice, I've been in client sessions all morning. I also appreciate your moment of pause that you brought there, Melissa. One of the things I support leaders to do is, when not only they feel the resistance in themselves, but they feel it around them, is to go towards it. You know, the old let's not go there. You know, it's better just to gloss over things. Is you know, that sign of passivity. Much easier in many ways to not go to these topics. I'm delighted to see some other men here today. I noticed we're in the minority, but I've learned a lot from listening so far. Just to introduce myself, I'm a 50-year-old man, Brit, father, leader. I co-founded Inclusion Partners, a consultancy that works primarily with multinationals and at senior executive level to support them to become better allies, more inclusive, and to cultivate inclusive and compassionate cultures. I said I'm a father. I have a 15-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy, a boy who I realize year 8, I'm told, is the time when they're most likely to be exposed to some of the most toxic, pernicious parts of the culture out there, Andrew Tate, etc., Russell Brand even. And I'm also struck by something that was said earlier on, which I think is at the heart of this. In fact, it's been underlined a few times, which is, you know, at some level, none of us want to harm, and also at some level, we're all the issue here. I think back to myself, growing up in the 80s and 90s, and some of what was acceptable, and that I did not bat an eyelid when comments were made, even experiences were shared amongst male friends, and how I would react so differently myself these days in my personal life. And yet I realize that you all realize it takes great courage to stand up to those that we work with, those who can influence our pay, our progress in the organization that we work in, and challenge them. And I think that's where men have a huge role. Men, I'm sure many of you are aware, are hugely effective as change agents in this area. In fact, I would go further and say we have not just the privilege, but the responsibility to take others with us, to share with people why it's important for us. For me, yes, it's personal. I have a daughter who now recognizes that she's entering a world that's not equal, where she will have to watch herself in many situations, more than I did when I was 15 or 16, or becoming a young adult. But also what we care about in our organizations. And so it's important that men are articulate about why this is important to them. Yes, that we pay attention to the resistance in ourselves, in others, but that we use the position, the privilege we have, and provide the platform, provide the space to hear what other people are experiencing. I just shared on, maybe it wasn't the right Jamboard, but an article that really struck me that came out, I think it was yesterday, by Marina Hyde in The Guardian on the Russell Brand issue. Very self-critical, but also very critical of her fellow media colleagues on how they did or didn't respond to what wasn't an allegation, was what was heard on air on Radio 2 way back in the Saxgate scandal, and how the response was positioned, and this societal victim blaming, gaslighting that's been talked about. And she recognizes, and shares her shame around how she recognizes that she was focused on the wrong things. I guess to bring it into allyship, I have hundreds of conversations with leaders, often in very, very senior influential positions, confidential conversations where when they recognize that, they own up to what are some of the blockers for them. Why don't they step forward? Why don't they use that position and that privilege? A lot of it is around awareness, and a lot's been said about that today, that need with humility to listen, not defend, not attack, not deflect, but really hear the experience of those who have very different life experiences. I'm not an expert on sexual harassment. I generally don't deal with those kind of cases, but I would say it's all connected. The cultures that tolerate pernicious, whether it's banter, whether it's behaviours towards people of other genders or other minorities. So that awareness, be able to step into that, have the willingness to really explore, really investigate the experiences that others are having, the impact of those experiences. And there's so many ways that can be done, not just through conversations like this, but a leader, of course, has the privilege to be able to approach people in the organization and ask questions and learn, maybe asking different questions. The other key barrier is confidence. We're living at a time of course, huge swings, identity politics, culture wars. These are topics that a lot of leaders feel they can't go towards because they feel they don't know enough about them. They haven't been affected by them. They fear it. They fear they would get it wrong. So I think there's a real role for male leaders encouraging each other, supporting each other, validating each other, affirming each other in doing this work, this personal work, but also in upskilling themselves. One of the things I'm struck by is, it's very understandable, is the reluctance to speak up, even in the situations where you're the most obvious person to do so. You lead the team, you're in the room, you've just been speaking to the importance of inclusion and equity, and we don't speak up because of fear that we're going to ruin a relationship, that we're going to be seen as the fun police, that we're going to be seen as someone who we can't have open, free-flowing conversations around. There are very simple techniques for being able to share and point out and reflect back to people what the impact of their actions are. But it does take that commitment to learn them. So I'm not going to go on for much longer. I completely agree with what you said, Animah, earlier around intent versus impact. You know, the first line of defense is always, well, I didn't mean anything. It was meant in jest, in lightness. I didn't realize. I think it's okay to acknowledge people's good intent, absolutely, but then not shy away from sharing with them the impact on you, the impact on people you know, and then being part of the solution with them, being available, being ready to support them with some of the less comfortable steps that are part of this journey for so many of us. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Great to hear from you, and really interesting things that you mentioned there. One of which I want to call attention to, which was the sharing that you mentioned. The leaders listening to their people and trying to kind of like sit with maybe the difficult things that they hear. It kind of like reminded me of like as a child growing up, you hear stories from the adults, and the stories are meant to teach you things. And I'm just wondering whether we hear stuff, but also hearing the stuff would be a lot more valuable and precious if the conversations come out of hearing the stuff, and what we don't understand, or what doesn't land with us, or what we are triggered by, we can talk about and we can unpack it as a family, as a community, as even a couple, to try and get to a place where both of us still feel safe and secure and even cared for by the other. So the conversations following on from the sharing, I think, is also very important. I think you kind of like shone a bit of light on that. Thank you for that. Animah, anything that you'd like to respond?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Daniel. I mean, we really did want to hear from the men, and I think it's so important. I mean, men, everyone who's listening, and there are, as always in these conversations, more than women than men. I mean, I really want men to be playing a major role in this. You don't get to step out of it. It's because you've not been part of the conversation that this is continuing. So we really need men to step up, to speak up, talk to your friends and so on the moment you sense something is slightly off. You know, the famous mate campaign that's going on in London at the moment, right? Talk to your friends if you feel that they've crossed a barrier and treated a woman in a disrespectful manner, right? That's the lowest form of problem. And of course, right at the top are the whole sexual assaults and rapes and so on that we're seeing with the Russell Brands of this world, right? And imagine if they had been taught at a very early age that this is not on. But if none of their friends, because it's hard for the women to do so because we're coming from a lower power dynamic, let's face it, and the men don't listen to us in today's world, but they will listen to other men. So I really cannot emphasize enough that men, you can change this. And I'm conscious as well, we have a rather well-known male ally who's just joined the room here in the UK. I don't know if you can speak, because I know you were quite busy today. Elliott, if you want to come up, raise your hand, and we'd be delighted to hear from you and share your insights. If you can't completely understand, maybe you're not able to do so, but I think it would be wonderful that we all get to hear also from another male ally as well as Daniel. I'm also conscious that Lisa hasn't spoken yet, and there are people raising their hands. So I'm going to allow people to come to stage, but I think, Lisa next, right, Vernon? Anything else you want to say about male allyship? You're a man. Anything you want to add?
Well, yeah, I really think that, us guys have really got to open up and allow ourselves to be more vulnerable. to share, what affects us, how we feel about things. I think part of the reason why mental health issues among men kind of like skyrocketed over the pandemic was because they were holding in so much of stuff, and they weren't. They felt that they couldn't be vulnerable, or couldn't be emotional, or couldn't allow their problems to be shared. And this is what guys need to come around to. It's not about manning up. It's that, that's such a silly thing about being this rock, because rocks don't have any feelings, right? And as people, we do have feelings. So yeah, men, learn to open up, learn to be a lot more emotional, even to feel things, to not be so stoic. Yeah, I think that's part of the journey towards better masculinity, I guess. Positive, constructive masculinity. I'm going to pass the mic over to Lisa, who hasn't spoken in a while. I'm sorry that it's taken a while, Lisa. Wonderful to have you here with us. Every time we have you, Lisa, are you ready to speak? If you could introduce yourself and take it away. Vernon done speaking. Thanks, Lisa. Over to you.
Thank you. And it's been amazing to listen to everybody speak and hear from everybody's different perspectives, which is always what is so powerful about these sessions. They really do allow us to learn and to understand and take things from a different perspective. So I work with leaders around sort of doing the inner and outer work, and helping leaders really to upskill, to be able to navigate the world that we live in now, and stop events like we've had this week happening, because it has been so incredibly triggering. It brought up some things for me that I just sort of put in the past and taken as things that happened, and then did take a moment to start thinking, how had that impacted my behaviour as I moved through the world. But now I work with leaders, helping them to be more sort of intentional and effective, and more human, more head and heart led, because when we have leaders who are working from that perspective, they do challenge things and have the skills to have these difficult conversations that we need leaders to have. We need leaders to be a lot more bold, a lot more willing to step outside of the box and challenge things. And I was saying yesterday that there was an event at the Royal Television Society convention, and the chief exec of Channel 4, Alex Mahone, was saying, how awful she thought these things were, and what a terrible time it was for women. But at the same event, Tim Davie of the BBC said he was asking questions about whether he could have done more when Russell Brand was at the BBC. And I just, it was this sort of, could I have done more, rather than, I know I could have done more. I know I could. And taking that level of ownership and that level of responsibility to actually change things. Because my sense is we're all part of the problem, unfortunately, because our silence, our complicity is all allowing things to go ahead and carry on. And I've got two nieces, who are 15 and 17, coming into the world. And it's such a different world to the one I grew up with. And it isn't safer for sure. I don't feel it's safer at all. And so I think we have to look at, as leaders, as individuals, what is the work that we're doing? What's the personal growth work? I loved what Melissa did to help us really connect into the feelings in our body, because many of us, hold our own beliefs and are really sort of, attached to those beliefs and attached to the stories that sort of shape our world and give us framework. And actually a lot of our beliefs aren't true. And, it can feel really disconcerting when we have our beliefs challenged and realise that what we thought was true, which is why I think so many people do jump to the defence of perpetrators, because it can feel so awful to them, for it shakes their very foundations of what they believe in the world. But I think we do have to all be much braver, much bolder, and much more connected as individuals, move from this sort of me to we leadership and me to we community, so that when we hear things, we're listening with that connected, heart-opened feeling, as opposed to, listening in a very separate way. So those are the things that I just wanted to share today. I'd love to hear from Elliott if he's available. And I just want to thank everybody who's spoken today as well. So thank you. I'm Lisa and I'm done speaking.
Lovely, Lisa. Thank you so much. From the me to the we. Yeah, we are better together. And focusing on the we allows us to kind of like, in a way, think about more than just our own needs, but the needs of a community. Really important. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. I'm going to pass the mic to Elliott, who has been in our rooms before, and wonderful to have you back again. Lovely to have you. If you could just introduce yourself to all of us here and then speak to the topic, Elliott, that'll be wonderful. Elliott, over to you.
Hey, Vernon, thank you so much, and thank you, Animah, for inviting me. I have a couple of minutes. I'm on the school run, so I've got to be quick, otherwise my daughter will be very angry if I'm late. But I couldn't come in without sharing a few thoughts. So I think my first thought is we need to start young. We are seeing a rise of cases of sexism and misogyny in schools. Around 19% of primary school teachers and around 29% of secondary school teachers witness sexism and misogyny in their schools on a regular basis. That's new research from Adebambo. And I think that says a lot, right? If we're not talking to young people, our children, our nieces and nephews, the people that we may care for in our wider communities, if we're not part of our communities and we're not brave enough to confront these conversations explicitly with young people, then we're not going to see the better future. So we need to make sure that we are equipped with the knowledge and skills and confidence to be able to talk to young people, to hold space for them, to allow them to discover the world, talk honestly with us, but we can gently guide them around what is right or wrong. We are seeing the Andrew Tates, the manosphere, the incel culture is massive. The young people that I speak to, they all have seen the messages around what masculinity and manhood is, the idea that to be a man is only to be a provider, breadwinner, and on the more toxic side to be dominant and to strive for other people, men and women, to submit to you. So I think it's really important that we have those conversations. I think secondly, I want to touch on role modeling. I think sometimes when we think about male allyship, it definitely is also, of course, being proactive and reactive and talking and intervening and those kind of things I'm going to come to. But I think on a day-to-day basis, it's just being a good person, being respectful, holding boundaries, hosting good conversations, like the little things. And I think we learn so much from the people around us. They set the standard, if you like, especially if you're someone in a position of leadership, whether that's at work, in your family, or in your local faith group, wherever it is. But I think role modeling the behaviors that we want to see is so important, and something that everyone can do. If you're a male ally, you don't feel like you have the confidence, skills and knowledge to kind of be that person that's going to intervene in the moment, you can role model the right behaviors and never think that your role modeling is not having an impact. It definitely is. I also want to talk about kind of reactive and proactive allyship, and I think what we want is to be doing both. And for me, proactive allyship is about kind of going back to that role modeling, right? It's about sharing the caring responsibilities. It's about working flexibly. It's about taking paternity leave. It's about doing all the things that in your day-to-day life, support the people and the women around you, whether that's your wife, your daughter, your mother, your work colleagues. What is it that you can do? Be involved in D&I initiatives. Be involved in the gender equity network. Be involved in the parenting network. Like, join the committee, organize the events. Take your paternity leave, your full paternity leave, if you can afford it. Lots of organizations offer fully paid paternity leave now. Take it. It's important to gender equality. We know that dads who take enhanced paternity leave are more likely to work flexibly later on. And we know if dads are working flexibly and are equal parents, it has a massive impact on the gender pay gap. So I think we have to be proactive and think, how can we contribute to our families and to our societies and workplaces from a position of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And then there's being brave with the reactive stuff. Like this week, we've seen with Russell Brand, speaking out, using your platform, using your voice. But more on a personal level, when you are at work, or when you are on the bus or whatever it is, wherever you are, and you see things that are inappropriate, you're in the pub, like being confident enough to use your voice in that space. And I know it's not easy, but life is not easy, and there's ways that we can do things that are not confrontational. And that is something that I think we need to be trained on and learn a bit more. But we can use our intuition. You know, we know how to talk to people most of the time. We know how to negotiate. We know how to suggest things, whether that's in a very assertive way or in a kind of, you know, suggestive friendly way. But we can move through that. And I think it's for men to just be in the mindset of understanding the power we have, the responsibility we have, and the ability we have, and being able to use our voice when it really matters, and when people need us. I think the last point I'm going to make, which is just kind of really echoing what a previous speaker mentioned, was about being bold and brave. You know, I did this work, and being a male ally is something that I think we definitely have the responsibility to do, of course. But at the same time, it can be challenging and difficult, right? Because you're going to be an outlier at the beginning. Maybe you're going to be the only one speaking out of your friendship groups. Maybe you're going to be the one at work that puts your hand up and says something. But we have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. We don't get change from being comfortable. We get change from people being confident enough to stand up and be the one that says something first. And if you believe in something enough, and if something touches your heart enough and you care about it enough, you're not going to care about being an outlier. You're not going to care about what your friends may say. You know, and if you do, that will not be as big an issue as actually solving the problem. So I think it's about just stepping into your bravery, being happy, being uncomfortable. You'll get comfortable eventually, so that's fine. But just being brave and bold, you know, and continuing on this work. So I'm going to leave it there. I need to get going, but thank you so much. I'm going to listen in for a few more minutes, and yeah, happy to come back in the future. But thank you for holding this space. It's been amazing. Thank you so much. I'll see you all soon.
Lovely, Elliott. Thank you so much for your sharing. Modeling, yes, I'm a big fan of modeling because I think it's so important. You know that saying, like you can't see what you can't be what you can't see. So if somebody models great behavior in a particular situation and you see it and you learn from it, wow, you got to be that hero that you just saw take place. That heroic act. The modeling is so important. And modeling can come across in very simple moments in everyday life that shows how it's so much pleasant to be nice and kind. It's so much more constructive to be that and stuff like that. I mean, modeling, I'm a big fan of that. So it's always important to see where you can model great behavior in difficult situations. Step into it, as Elliott said, be the outlier. I think it's also partly something that you need to have the courage. But if you have a sense of adventure, courage comes easier, right? A sense of adventure, and I think it also speaks to something that Melissa usually talks about, which is curiosity. With curiosity, you will have a sense of adventure to be able to look at a difficult situation and try and figure out maybe how to approach it in a different way that can move the negative into the positive. So yeah, Elliott, thank you for inspiring these thoughts, and hope to see you again. Animah, any response to what he said?
Well, I'm so delighted, Elliott, that you joined us. You managed to, in the middle of the school run, join us. For those who may not be in the UK, I mean, Elliott is known as the model dad, right? Who really models what dads should be like, and taking up that slack that often is left to the mothers. So thank you. I mean, I think he truly walks the talk, and I see you, and with several others. We've had Lee Chambers talk on the Spanish Kiss a few weeks ago, and other men like Asal Nassim. I think there's some incredible men, British men in the UK, who have been speaking up in a big way when it comes to Russell Brand and when it comes to other forms of misogyny. And I think I'd like to think that it opens up the space for other men to follow, right? When they see the bigs like Elliott and Sal and Lee. So thank you for being here and showing us that men can make a difference. I was saying to another woman yesterday, do not underestimate what men can do. We don't have to mother men. If they put their will to it, They don't need to be told. They know exactly what to do. And it's for men to lead the way for other men. So thank you, Elliott. It's wonderful hearing your insights with us today. So thanks. Yes, back to you, Vernon.
Okay, I'd also like to ask any of the other speakers who have already spoken who would like to pipe in, because before I hand the mic over to Erica and Helen and Adebambo, any of the other speakers would like to pipe in response to anything that's just been said? Karen, Jan, Lisa, Daniel, Melissa.
I'll happily just comment there. Thanks so much, Elliott, for your input. It's really good to get the male perspective, I think, in someone working in this field, because I talk a lot about engaging men and boys, and I think sometimes the thing that's missing is that good role modelling. We see a lot of campaigns at the moment that are focused on trying to improve women's experiences and male violence, and unfortunately sometimes they drive quite a strong message that can be manipulated into meaning something entirely different to the certain subcultures online, which concerns me. So I think that good role modelling and the community-led approach is really, really important, and something that will have much, much quicker and less friction in its process of improving things. That's not to say that I don't believe that people should be offended, because, as I said in the presentation I gave this week, men should absolutely be offended by male violence, because it should offend all of us, and hopefully it does. But at the same time, we need to look at how we create less friction, and I think we do that through not always just focusing on the negatives, but really switching it into the positives, and doing that with sensitivity towards victims and survivors is a really difficult, complex process, but one that I think really needs a lot of attention, so that we don't fall foul of almost creating more of the online speech and more of the hateful behaviour that we are trying to actually fight against.
I'd just like to add one more thing while Elliott is here. I remember you started like a retreat or something for men. Is that right? If you want to tell us, recruit more men to that, that would be wonderful. So if you want to announce that to people, I don't know if that's still going on. I remember you had a retreat a few weeks ago, virtual retreat.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone again. So my organisation, Music Football Fatherhood, we're running for a good few years now, and it's all about kind of open conversations about being a man and being a dad. And those conversations can range from mental well-being to connection with our children, but also into gender equity in the household, redefining and rethinking our roles as men and what that means in regards to family and work. So we do a lot of online stuff. We have monthly sessions called The Lodge, and we invite speakers who are maybe therapists or just experts with interesting things to say about any given topic that is in relation to what we talk about. So we do those online on a monthly basis, but we also work quite a lot in football. I'm a big football fan myself. I'm a QPR fan. There's probably no QPR fans in the building, that's okay. But we work with lots of different clubs. We were at Crystal Palace in South London on Saturday, and we took loads of dads down there, and amazing conversations. And as someone was saying, I think Vernon, as you were saying, or I think it was actually you, Animah, like men, when we put our minds to something and when we are given this space, there are so many good ideas shared. There is so much encouragement. There's so much accountability as well. That's an important word, accountability. And there is so much honesty. And I really think it is about calling men in. My work is about calling men in. There's a space for calling men out, of course. I do that a lot too. But it's really, for me, at the core of what I do is like calling men into this conversation and saying, do you know what? If we can rethink how we do things, if you can be a breadwinner, but also you can be provided for, you can be a leader, but you can be led, you can be a protector, but you can be protected too. That's not just good for, your family. That's actually really good for you as well. Like, that's great for you. And I'm a perfect example of that. I had a corporate career. I worked in the civil service for a long time, and got to the point 3 years ago, I wanted to leave my job. And the only way I was able to leave my job and pursue the work I do now is because my wife has a good full-time job. And that was a prime example of me for that period of time, being provided for. And it's led to not only like my wife having a great career, me having a great career, our child being able to experience both her parents there for her present every day. And we only got to that point now because as a family we decided we're going to do things differently. It was very beneficial to me. So positive masculinity and gender equity is good for men, and part of that is men being able to call things out, being able to stand up and say that is wrong. That's not the world we want. And I think it is about setting those standards, and the events that we do is about setting the standards. People that come to our events, they know exactly what they're getting themselves in for. It's fun, we have a really good time, but at the same time we're going to be honest, we're going to challenge each other, we're going to talk about a future that we can co-create, and we're going to do that together. And it's a brave conversation. So the work has been going on for ages. We're not going to stop. It's going to be here for many years. I'm so privileged to do the work I do. It's so exciting. Yes, it can be difficult at times, but I wouldn't have it any other way. So I do actually need to go now. I'm going to drop off. But yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you so much. And I did invite Animah onto the comment section as a kind of weekly or bi-weekly show I do on LinkedIn videos, a LinkedIn video. So at some point we'll do that. And it'll be great to get everyone involved and sharing in the comments and being part of the conversation. So, thank you so much for having me. I'll see you all soon.
Fantastic, Elliott. Thank you so much for joining. And all the best to you until next time we see you again. Yeah, and on that note, I'm going to pass the microphone to some people who have been very patient, waiting for their moments. Erica, it'll be great to have you introduce yourself and then speak to the topic or anything that you've heard thus far. Erica, over to you. Vernon done speaking. Erica, are you there? You need to unmute yourself. Okay, Erica is not responding, so I'm going to pass the microphone over to Helen. Helen, are you there? Yep. If you can introduce yourself and speak to the topic or anything you've heard. Thanks for joining. Vernon done speaking.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm especially delighted that this conversation is taking place on LinkedIn, because this platform is our professional space, and it's better when we can bring our whole selves to this space. So thank you, Amina. Thank you, Vernon, for creating this opportunity for people also from the rank and file to speak up. I want to place my experience of the Russell Brand phenomena in the context that I see, which is he is a comedian, and humour is a particularly pernicious and powerful form of harassment when it's weaponized against people who are in a minority or weaker in some way. And he got away with it for so long because he's being funny, and who doesn't like funny? We love funny. We're programmed to love funny. So the jokes that he would tell in plain sight about hurting women were enjoyed by thousands of people publicly. And it's the kind of language, the kind of jokey way that those concepts get incorporated into everyday experience that is so very pernicious. I heard a great example the other day of a woman walking down the street and a guy whistling at her as she walked down the street. And with a woof whistle, or I think we call it a woof whistle, what you have is an expression of control in public space, so that a woman understands, I may be here, we're both on the street, but actually this is male space. I'm being dominated, I'm being made to be self-conscious and perhaps unsafe. Also here, the power dynamic of a woof whistle is to control also the open space. I would like to also address some of the points that were made very passionately by two of your male speakers, which is that men need to speak up more, men need to say more, men need to be braver. I work as a communication consultant. I think that many men want to speak up more but don't have the tools. I want to recommend two very small expressions, but I would be glad if there are other speakers or listeners on the line right now who could convert that into a practical suggestion, because we can, pound on the table and say men need to speak up. What people need all the time is the tools, is the words, so that more men can speak up and feel comfortable about speaking up in socially appropriate ways that won't cost them socially. So one of them is really, really small, which is also the British, not cool, bro, to take somebody aside and say, yeah, that thing, not cool. It simply creates a way to say the principle that is socially acceptable. So that's one. And the other is, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. That's it. I also want to say one more thing, which I really appreciate, which is Elliott is a person I don't know him, I haven't met him, I haven't followed his content. This will perhaps be an opportunity for me to do so. But I want to really emphasise that somebody going to get their kid does not make them outstanding. It makes them really, really average. And what we have is a context, is a situation of normalised imbalance where a father who does normal things like parent is held up as a role model. I think that should be the minimum standard, not to pedestal that. And I also want to speak very, very clearly to say that because somebody has a daughter, that's not the reason that this is relevant. Somebody is married, that's not the reason this is relevant. It's relevant because women being safe is a human rights issue. Just like, I'm against racism, not because I have a child of colour or I've married a person of colour. I'm against racism because it's a human rights issue. So relationship doesn't put something on the agenda. Principle puts something on the agenda. Thanks so much for giving me some airtime.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you. Some very interesting points there. I really kind of feel you about the that's not cool, and I don't be that guy. I'm going to remember that, so thank you for those tips. Fantastic. Animah or any of the other speakers previously, would you like to respond to Helen's contribution?
I'm gonna ask Daniel to speak. Just very quickly, Helen, maybe you don't... Elliott appears on TV, and really it's about emphasizing that men play a high role. So it's not just about him going to pick up his daughter, right? There's far more than that. So that's why I've described him as a role model. But yeah, I think Daniel would love to hear what you have to say listening to Helen.
Yes, thank you. And I love what you were saying, Helen. I agree. It's a lot about the language. I'm always a little hesitant to give people too many prescriptions around this because, of course, it depends on... I think it's really important to say things in a way that's authentic for us, that's also culturally sensitive to where we are. But just to give a couple of practical things, even simpler than the not cool, sometimes, let's face it, we feel the risk of bringing anything up at all, or our words being misinterpreted. And one of the most effective ways we can do it is the sharp intake of breath in the moment, as soon as we hear something, which just almost gives that person a signal to think again about what they said, or continuing with where they were going. There's in the moment, and then there's what you can say when you can pull that friend or colleague to one side. And again, I'll go back to what I was saying earlier, because I think it's so important, which is to speak to the better instincts of that person. Beginning with, rather than going straight into, I didn't like what you said, or hang on, is going to a good intention. I know you didn't mean, you probably didn't realize, but this is how it affected me. This is what I observed. happening to the people in the room when you said that. This is what I know they say about these comments. When they're out of the room, and to remind them about the big picture. Why are we talking about this? Reminding them that you, like us, care about gender equality, equity in the workplace. We have that responsibility. Remind them of what the big vision outcome is. I often think I shouldn't need to do that, and yet we can get taken away with the humour, as Helen was saying. We can get off the point. We can go where it's easy. There's lots more. We could do another 90 minutes on this, and it's at the heart of my work, but I hope that's helpful.
Daniel, do you want to very quickly say what it is that you do? And I think along with Lisa as well, because I think it's important for people to know that there are men doing this work.
Yes.
And then we're going to invite, I think Karen also does some incredible stuff as well. But Daniel, go ahead.
Thanks, Animah, for that opportunity. I did say earlier I run a consultancy called Inclusion Partners. The work we do there typically is long-term coaching or kind of collective work with leaders, with leadership teams who taking those steps, typically have taken the steps but want to go deeper in how they embed an inclusive culture that focuses on gender equity, it focuses on all aspects of inclusion, and the particular focus I have, and there's now encouragingly a huge uplift in organizations investing in this work with not just their most senior leaders but with middle leaders to take the long hard steps month in, month out. So I'm often coaching leaders for 6 to 12 months in depth with with 360 tools, with all kinds of things where we can have these conversations and apply it to their day-to-day. Lisa and I, Lisa spoke earlier. Lisa's not just a passionate coach and advocate for gender equity, but also a very skilled facilitator and coach. We have started to work with groups of men where someone mentioned earlier some of the foundational faculties, capabilities of being, Vernon, you were talking about the importance of being open emotionally, to be able to resource ourselves to do this work. And again, that's not so easy to develop just like that. It requires a safe container, it requires good models, it requires encouragement, it requires time and commitment. And we do that by a couple of different programs. You can look up our details and see the details of those programs, healthy masculinity programs, where we work with leaders to do just that, whether they're business owners, whether they're corporate leaders. One last thing I'll say, something I do pro bono and is becoming, again, a hugely important and useful resource for a lot of men, regardless of their walk of life, are men's groups. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that format. In short, a safe space for men to speak from the heart and be heard. These are spaces where I've been involved for many years. I run an open men's group in London. As I said, this is a pro bono thing, and you don't even have to pay to come. Where men, when they feel that unconditional attention, we're not there to fix each other, to coach each other, just to hear each other. We'll sometimes speak to some of the, let's call them the most challenging, darker areas of their own experience in their relationships, even sometimes in areas that we've been talking about today. And I think that's a hugely important resource. Most men don't have that. They don't do that when they meet their cycle buddies or their beer buddies or play golf or whatever. The conversation doesn't usually go to that area. So there's a few things. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, wonderful work that you're doing. All the best. Yep.
Thanks. I just want to add, because I want to hear also from Lisa and Karen in terms of what they do. And then, and I'm sorry for those who are still waiting, because I think Jan also, if she's able to speak, would probably share with the support group that she started. But, Lisa, if you wanted to add anything to Daniel, and then Karen, in terms of the work that you do, this is both in supporting men in addressing these things, but also supporting women, especially, you know, women who have gone through some forms of sexual harassment and assault. So, Lisa, do you want to add anything to what Daniel has said in terms of the work that you're doing among men?
Yeah, thanks, Animah. I mean, as Daniel mentioned, we have a joint program that we're doing to help men be more sort of intentional and human and heart-led, and that doesn't just sort of happen overnight. It takes a real commitment, and it takes leaders to decide that they want to sort of upskill and change the way they're working. And I do also work with women who say that they want gender equality and they want to support that, but then find actually a lot of beliefs and things are coming up that are getting in the way. So I work on both sides of that. And also I wanted to mention our Speak Up group, Animah, that we've set up for male allies, which is a free group that men can join. It's we're just getting that off the ground. So if you are a man and you want to get some more resources, you want to connect with men and women to learn how to speak up more, to step forward more, and to be a more heart-led leader, then certainly those are the places that you can go. Sorry, I'm Lisa and I'm done speaking. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah, and was there Karen that Animah had called out to? Who was it that?
Yeah, hi. So I kind of work, I guess, on the opposite side of things in a way that I'm more focused on staff members, local authorities, police services, looking at embedding culture, but realising that sometimes the top-down, you know, it's difficult sometimes to engage everybody in that top-down kind of push for culture change. So I work very much training people who are in the public sphere of women's safety, and even though my training is aimed at men and women, and I do like to have both in the room, I do tend to get a lot more women attending the training, but where men do attend, really positively change their attitudes, because they really honestly do not appreciate women's everyday experiences. So I start the session always with a game of bingo, and I hand out cards that are there for people to look at as they enter. And on that bingo card has all the daily adaptations that women make to their lives, from carrying a key in your hand, watching what your drink is doing, planning a route home beforehand, taking a taxi instead of walking, taking your headphones out. Endless mental load that women carry, mental, physical and financial load that women carry in terms of their personal safety. And I ask everybody there, all of the delegates, to just cross off the things that they do. And it ends, I've also done it with 10 fingers as well, so put a finger down. I did this at a police conference, and it starts a really good conversation between the men and women, because they look at each other and realise that the women are usually there, sat there with a full house, and the men quite often have that crossed off maybe one or two things. And that gender division in terms of personal safety, or what it is, how it limits your life, is a real kind of light bulb moment for a lot of men in the room, because they don't realise the implications, the impact that this has on them. So that's one part. And then I work in colleges, educational settings as well, at trying to embed peer mentorship for young people to talk about what misogyny is or isn't, what sexual harassment is and isn't, and then be able to embed that themselves within their spaces, because young people don't want more adults telling them what to do. What they actually want is for each other to have the power to step in. So a lot of my work does talk about active bystandership, but very much with a focus on why do we need active bystandership, because it doesn't work if we just try and get people to do that off goodwill. We need to explain the reason first. And Karen, I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. Jan, anything to say with regards to the work that you do?
Hi, sorry, I'm not used to LinkedIn speaking. I'm
okay.
John, and I'd just like to add that it's been very interesting listening to today, and just I also looked at the Jamboard and some of the comments that were on there, and even there someone is saying it's the responsibility of people to call out harassment and to speak up. I'd like to just reiterate that people will never speak up unless they're assured that they're going to be believed and listened to, or at the very least treated fairly. Society is still telling us it's our responsibility for how the harasser or the predator behaves, and it's not our responsibility at all. I think that until institutions like the police force and employers start taking victims seriously and actually holding perpetrators to account, then people will continue to be silent if they don't feel safe speaking out. And I've just tried to make it my mission to be as vocal as I possibly can be and to call out the victim blaming, because it's not my fault if my perpetrator goes on to assault someone else. I spoke out, and even if I didn't have the strength to speak out, it's not my responsibility how he behaves. And like some of the great speakers in here today have said, it's male allyship. When men start calling out men's behaviour, then we should see some more results. But not only that, I also had females who victim blamed me, and when I had reported my colleague and said that he'd exposed himself to me in the workplace, it was said to me, why did I not say no more than once? His behaviour was my responsibility, and until we can change people's way of thinking, then it's going to be a hard battle for us, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for letting me speak today, and I'm Jan and I'm finished speaking now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much. And for calling out what came up on the Jamboard. I'm going to leave it there so that other people can see it. I don't know. The thing about the Jamboard is that it allows for anonymous postings, but it's interesting to see how we can deal with it when it does happen. So thank you for calling it out. I'm going to pass the mic over to Erica. Thank you so much for your patience. If you could introduce yourself and then speak to the topic or anything you've heard. Wonderful to have you join us. Vernon done speaking. Erica, still unavailable. Okay, then it goes to Adebambo. Are you there? Have I said your name correctly, Adebambo? Over to you. If you could introduce yourself and then speak to the topic. Vernon done speaking. Over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Vernon. My name is Adebambo. I'm from Nigeria, but I love this topic that says speak up and harassment of the thing. But me as a person, I do not believe in this speak up. Why? Is because, as a child, I've lost trust in someone I love the most, which is my mother, when I speak up to her, and she did not believe me. When I lost my dad, I was taken to a woman to stay there, that she will sponsor my education, and one of her daughters used to molest me, used to harass me, but anytime I talk to my mother about it, she felt I'm just lying. I want to leave the place. I don't want to stay there anymore just because she cannot afford to pay my school fees. So now that I'm grown again, I don't see any reason to speak up, because I think maybe while speaking up, you are just trying to expose yourself to the world, and people will later use that against you in future, or use that to harass you. Something happened here in my country of recent, that one of our musicians died of depression because he was forced to take some drugs, to take some hard drugs, to join some bad gangs, which he said he cannot do. Because of that, he was threatened to death. And this guy was speaking up. Nobody could help him. Nobody could take action until his death. Now that he died, people are now protesting. People are not coming out. People are now showing like fake love, showing all this kind of thing, and trying to protest on social media. They need to find the killer. They need to arrest this and they need to arrest that. So someone like me, I used to tell people that, okay, what if someone speak up and there's no follow-up? Some people are just dying in silence, and maybe some people just feel like maybe he or she is seeking attention, he or she is chasing clout, he or she is doing this or that. I've experienced most things that, okay, some people will just speak up, and at the end of the day, they will be harassed, they will be bullied, they will be making jest of them. they will be like, they will be using their what is paining them against them. I don't know if you understand. They will be using them, what is paining them, what they talked about against them. Someone talked about speaking and believing. I think it's right time parents needs to start bringing their children closer to them. They need to start letting their children be their friends. They need to start listening. They need to start believing their children. They need to create that room for their children to tell them what they are feeling, what's happening in their schools, what happens, what is going on between them and their friends, what is it that is bothering their mind. They need to start trusting them. This speaking of, now that I'm speaking, I don't really believe in it because, okay, there was a time that I posted something that, okay, is suicide an option. And someone sent me a DM that if you want to die, you die. Imagine. So just all this kind of speaking up of a thing, most times people just speak up, there will be no follow-up, people will speak up, and at the end of the day, it will be used against them. Let me say this thing. There was someone that I know that was raped. That was a lady that was raped, and the person that raped her is an influential person. So the girl couldn't come up to speak up just because she and her mother was scared as well. When I heard about it, I too was scared because I don't know what will come up after, if I should maybe speak up, or if I should what can be done to help such situation, because I don't know, maybe he will use his influence to just bring me down or tarnish my image, or all those kind of things. So all this picking up or this and that, though I love the topic anyways, and I love to be part of this program, but I still don't. I've not seen anything that will still convince me, because this speaking up of it has to do with trust. I do find it hard to trust and to believe what people say. Someone like me now, I do things the way I want. Most times I will just wake up, I'll be angry, I will delete everybody in my social media, I will just do something. Most times I will feel like, am I crazy? Just because I cannot tell people what is actually going on within me, what is actually happening to me right now. Most times I will post it on social media, but people will just overlook it and think maybe it's just for fun. But it's actually what is paining me. But I cannot come directly and put it there that, okay, this is the thing that is affecting me currently. But I do bring it out in a stylish way. Maybe I can even say someone that, okay, I can confide in and tell and speak my mind too. So Mr. Daniel and Mr. Vernon, this speaking of, is a good one, but I think our parents needs to do much more, as in our leaders needs to do much more to make this world a better place for us to live.
Yeah, thank you, Adebambo. Thank you so much for your honesty, and I hear you. I really do. I just want you to know, right, that when we say speak up, right, and if you were, I'm not sure whether you were in the room at that point in time when I said, before even speaking up, we need to listen. And one of the things is that even as you feel in a very vulnerable position, you listen to see who you can speak to. You listen to see who you can bring your problem or your question to, who will have the capacity and the ability to answer you in the way that you need to be answered and to be responded to. I am very sorry.
How do I identify that kind of person? I said the person that I trust most on earth, which is my mother. Then, so I already look trust in her. So how do I identify? How do I know? Okay, this is the right person to meet, or this is the right person to speak up to.
Okay, I am very, very sorry, and I feel you when you said that it was your own mother who would not listen to your cry for attention and care and love. I don't know how to respond to that, but I feel your disappointment and your pain, and I'm very sorry that you had to go through that. Would any of the other speakers like to step in and help Adebambo kind of like unpack this sense of hopelessness and despondency that he feels?
Hi, I can just quickly respond to Adebambo. I'm sorry. Just first of all, sorry for your experience. That's really heartbreaking that the person that is supposed to protect you was the person that let you down. And just to let you know that you're not alone with that. It's quite common. And when we talk about victim blaming and not believing women, that should also include not believing children. We have a real problem with this assumption, or for some reason this myth that children lie and that we shouldn't believe children when they disclose, which is absolutely not true and absolutely is a myth. And children don't lie about these things generally in the same way that women don't lie about these things generally. And I think that's a really, really valid moment, a really valid point that you've made there, because when that trust is broken, that's very difficult then to be able to identify other people who are going to listen. And that's why I think it's so important that we raise this issue of this sort of societal gaslighting that happens, where we think that we can talk to people and we'll be believed and trusted, and actually when we then learn that either it's a member of a powerful authority like the police, or it's someone who is supposed to care about us, doesn't listen and doesn't believe us, that's when things really get desperate for victims. So I just want to, that probably doesn't help you personally in this moment, but it's really, you're not alone with that, and it is something that everybody needs to be really, really aware of, that only 5% of abuse gets reported at the time. And, we are silent a lot of the times because people don't have the skills and the aptitude to be able to deal with it in that moment, and unfortunately victims like yourself get very let down by that.
Thank you, Karen. I believe Jan might have something to say, right, Jan? Okay, Jan, are you there? Adebambo, I am really, I feel you, and I wish that we can arrive at something together. Please, follow us. Some solutions will come up, even as we share our stories, and even as we, and to help reframe what you have been traumatized by. To speak to the pain, and to share your story, so that as many of us can step in and suggest, and the speak up sessions are safe spaces. We try to give as much space for people to talk about their pain and to talk about the stuff that they're going through, and we have various people here who will step in to see how they can maybe offer a different perspective, so that you can reframe these past experiences, so that it doesn't hold you in in a cage that makes you feel helpless. We are here. The Speaking Up Network is here.
Hi Vernon, sorry I had trouble unmuting myself, it's John. With regards to the gentleman who's just spoken, apologies I've forgotten his name, please reach out to helplines. I believe Animah has put some numbers into the backup chat or on the post itself. Initially, when I wasn't believed, I suffered institutional betrayal. I know your mother is the most important person in your life, and it's the one person you really think will believe you, but also people who grow up and go to work, they spend the majority of their they spend the majority of their day at work, in a workplace, and I gave full trust to my employer, and I really believed that I was protected in the workplace. The betrayal I felt when I came forward and told and was called a liar was very damaging, so I can understand how hurt you feel, but I promise you, if you keep speaking out, you will find someone who's prepared to listen and believe you. Please don't let someone who's hurt you put you off reaching out for help from somewhere else, because there are good people out there, and there are people who understand what trauma is and how damaged that you've become. And I promise you, the Speak Up Network is a very safe place to share, and you will find a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of good-hearted people who are willing to help you. Thank you very much, Vernon. John's finished.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. Adebambo.
Can I
Yes, Animah, carry on.
Yeah. So, Adebambo, I mean, listening to you, that was just heartbreaking. And I mean, I did some work when I was in Malaysia around educating adults on child sexual abuse. And what you shared, unfortunately, it is a very common story. And as Karen said, you're not alone. And it is really common for children to not be believed. To be accused of lying, like, when they say someone has in the family has harmed them, and more so, I mean, I have a friend whose mother also said, when she said her sister was being abused by the uncle, accused of being a liar, and she stopped talking to her mother after that, right through to her adulthood. She's almost 60 now, and so I can imagine that pain goes on a long time, and I'm really sorry you're experiencing this. I think the other thing that for us, it's also about sharing resources and support groups. Now, I don't think we have Nigeria yet on that spreadsheet that we've put up, because we only just put it up yesterday. We asked volunteers. So for anyone who has been sexually assaulted or abused, does not have to be a woman, right? Can be anyone, to share names of organizations in their own countries and cities. So if you do know someone, or anyone from Nigeria who does know of organizations in Nigeria, to put that up on the spreadsheet. I've got the links in the comments there where you can find the spreadsheet. So one of the things we want to do is sort of have a database of sorts, so that, so people in various countries will know where to go when they need help. And the other thing, you heard Jan speaking. So Jan is leading the group when it's dealing with sexual harassment. Now, that's a bit different. That's not about child sexual abuse, which is itself quite different. And I think that we can get groups in to address that as well. So I'm really, really sorry. The other thing I want to add, because you talked about the danger of speaking up, and you're absolutely right. It can be, when I first started to speak up, I came from a very sort of naive, sort of like, oh, why don't people speak up at work? But I very, very quickly, I mean, with the help of people like Jan and so on, realized it can be harmful to speak up, because if they're not being heard, they're not being supported, or worse. So in a workplace setting, if the person is retaliated against or fired, I've had, people in that work who've gone to jail. Jan, I think you need to... Sorry. Yeah. We've got people in our network who went to jail. This is in the United States, for speaking up against harms and so on. And that does, so it is dangerous sometimes, and I think everybody knows when they can or not. And I think, as Jan and Vernon have said, it's about knowing who to go to, if you've been harmed in any way, and so that's why some of these groups that I mentioned, whether they're in Nigeria or elsewhere, might be there to support. The other thing that when we say speak up, we're looking actually at addressing not so much survivors in speaking up, but the entire environment, the whole ecosystem. So if it's in a workplace context, or even in the case of Russell Brand, these were TV stations, right? Or these were producers, studios, and so on. That space should be safe, so that the women or other people who've been abused can go to them and report, knowing that they would be supported and believed. And even if they need help, like counseling, for example, not a lot of people talk about the psychological help that survivors need. And we're trying to tell workplaces, you need counselors, you need psychologists for people who've been harmed. Not just about, let's deal with the perpetrator, but also to give, that kind of support. So we're looking at, when we say speaking up, not just the act of speaking, but it's also people in power and leaders being open to listening without harming the person who speaks up, right? And we're also looking at the space itself. So we're a big believer in safe space. or brave spaces where people feel they can speak up, be supported, and those who are listening or receive feedback will learn how to receive it openly. And there was quite a bit of conversation, especially when we talked about male allies, right? How should men behave when they're being told some things, so that sort of self-awareness. So we're looking, when we talk about speaking up, the entire ecosystem, from the speaking, the listening, and the creating safe space. And we've gone a step further with the Speak Up Network, which is actually about systems. And this is why I've now sort of immerse myself more into DEI work. So we look at power imbalances, whether we're looking at power imbalances in organizations where the power tends to be more held by men, tends to be held more by, older white men. And on a global scale, one of the things a lot of people know I'm very passionate about, coming from Malaysia and the UK, is that Western nations need to start listening to people from other countries. So you're from Nigeria, right? And we should be listening to people from Nigeria instead of what's been happening for a very long time, is that people in the West think they're better. And that is not true, right? And these are the kind of things we're trying to change. So I'll stop speaking there. I don't know if, Adebambo, you've got anything else you want to say. Back to you, Vernon.
Thanks, Animah. Thank you. Adebambo, yeah. Mic is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Like I said, it has happened before, not now. It was then. That is what is still controlling my brain till date. Not that I really don't want to be believing, to trust people, or to confide in people. But what has happened in the past is what is still affecting me, is what is still on my head. In my organization, they do talk about this speak up every week. But I don't really believe in it. Like I said, I do feel like, okay, what if people speak up? This is what is going to happen. They don't even follow up. They might not. And some people will be like leaders. They are like watermelon. I'm using this example, watermelon, because some people are just green outside. They are red inside, totally. What they are splitting out is a good thing, but what they have in mind that they want to do. So if I should start talking about it, it's going to take a longer time. So maybe some other time, because when you come from a family where there is no love, don't let us talk about it. Thank you, the host, Animah. Maybe some other time we can share some other things together. Thank you, everyone.
Adebambo, sorry, I'm getting your name wrong, I'm so sorry. Adebambo, anytime you come into our rooms, you're most welcome to share, yeah? On that note, Animah, it's 2 hours, wow, 2 hours, 7 minutes.
I know, and I've got a lot on my plate, and we're going to have to wrap up. I know there's someone that has raised their hand to speak. I think the problem sometimes with LinkedIn is I don't seem to be able to get you on stage. Has Dr. Swati managed to join the stage or not?
No,
I'm
not from
sure.
where I see Dr. Swati.
I think
we can't seem to bring you up.
Yeah, it's LinkedIn acting up again. Unless you change device. Sometimes we know that the phone doesn't work as well as the computer, or vice versa. I don't know. But I think, and again, Erica is still here. I don't know if she wants to say something, but we will have to wrap up in the next few minutes because we're like, almost 40 minutes over our time.
Yeah, Dr. Swati, somehow we can't bring you up. I hope you will be back next week. If there's anything of urgency that you would like to respond to, please do use the Jamboard or the Google Sheet at bit.ly/sun sessions.
Comment on this.
Yeah, on the thread. Yeah. On that note, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jan. You're here. Erica, I don't know whether you're here. Adebambo, thank you so much for sharing with us. Animah, any last words?
I think we're good. I think, Vernon, we've done this for 2 years now, right? Or 2 years plus.
Indeed, we
having
have.
these regular, mainly on Clubhouse, and we've moved more recently to LinkedIn. And I think, as always, when we introduce a topic, we never know where it's going to go, right? We never know who's going to say what, except, the people who've already, are speakers. And we do love it when people join us from the audience and share their stories, because it gives us such insights and reminds us why, this whole thing, sharing stories, listening to each other, supporting each other, speaking up, sharing stories is a form of speaking up, right? And how powerful that is. So I just would like to thank everybody. I think it's been such a rich session with some incredible experts who've joined us on stage and people sharing their stories. We will continue next week, right, Vernon? We don't know what yet on. It depends what comes up. But just sort of watch this space. It's generally around this time each week.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess it's good night from Animah and myself, Vernon from Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Animah is in Nottingham, UK. And we'll be back again next week. Just keep an eye out on the on Animah's LinkedIn or mine, and you will know what's coming up next. So this is the Speaking Up Network sessions, the Sun sessions. Stay blessed, everybody, and let's all move together because we're better.